Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So we'll begin from the same place that we left off, which is the ayat, or the ayah rather, number 7. This is the ayah which explains that the Quran is divided into two parts, which is the muhkamat and the tashabihat. So the muhkamat are those which are those verses. You can even further subdivide it into not just verses, but even words themselves, individual words and alfaz that are in the Quran. So anything that's in the Quran, whether they are individual words, concepts, ayat, verses that are muhkamat. So these are things that are clearly understood. There is no ambiguity whatsoever in regards to their meanings. Okay, that's one kind. Is that clear? Well, what's the opposite of something that's clear is to be ambiguous. Mutashabihat, right? And as we explained, the word tashabuh, which derives, it means to be similar. Okay, things that are similar in appearance, but maybe not so discernible as to their differences. Like when Bani Israel said, "Inna al-baqara," that cows, meaning that the species, cows in general, tashabaha alayna, right? They all look the same to us. So, like a species, any species or genus as they call it, right? You have a whole group, a category. Within that group, there are individuals who are different from each other. So they're similar, but different, and that's the definition of a what? A genus or a species or category like that. So it makes sense? So how is it ambiguous? You hear a word, as an example, you've heard before. Correct? So you hear a word, and then you say, okay, I've heard this word before, I know this word, but it's not clear to me exactly what's being said here. Just like in the category, what I just mentioned, tashabuh, there's a species or a genus or category of a whole bunch of different individuals. They all look the same in certain ways, but they're all different too. So it's not easy for you to differentiate any in the beginning, to categorize. Does it make any sense? Am I being clear here? Okay, so in the same way, you hear a word and you say, okay, I know that word. However, in this context, I'm not quite sure what's going on. Say, in this context, when this word is used, it's not very clear to me what exactly is meant. You have to, like, of course, Bani Israel were trying to play games with Musa alayhi salam when they said, and then baqara tashabaha alayna, like cows all look the same. They didn't want to sacrifice the cows, so they just made an excuse. But the point is still there, is that what they're trying to make they're trying to make an analogy that, look, cows all look the same. How am I supposed to know which one? So in the same way, I have a word, a concept, an ayah that it's not really clear what's going on. The words are understood to me. I know what's been said, but what it means, I'm not clear on. That's what the tashabihat. As compared to if it's the exact opposite of muhkamat, what does that mean?
That's clear.
Right, something that when it's said or heard, I've heard it, someone said it, I heard it, I know exactly what they meant by it. That's the difference. So here, the ayah says that basically the Quran is divided into these two parts, correct? Some of them are muhkamat, meaning it's very easy to understand. Nobody really has to ask the question, what was intended here? What was meant here? I don't get it. Right? It's not clear to me. But there are parts of the Quran which are tashabihat, in which a person may raise the question. And that includes, by the way, okay, even to the Arab who it was revealed to, who were the masters of their language. And this is also an important and pertinent point, is that historically speaking, it is said that the Arabs in the time of the Prophet ﷺ were the most eloquent of Arabs. That every generation after them, the eloquence and the purity of the language was actually altered, which is written in texts, by the way. Historically speaking, this is how the ulama and the scholars and historians have viewed it, that what they call the afsahul Arab, the most eloquent of all of the Arab generations, is actually the generation of the Prophet ﷺ, for many reasons. Of course, one of them has to do with the revelation of the Quran itself. If the miraculous nature of the Quran lies in its language, then obviously it has to be revealed to people who are what? Masters of that language. The ones who truly understand that language and have no peers whatsoever, they're the ones who have to hear it and say, yeah, okay, this is something different. Right? Okay, that's number one. Number two, also, they study the Arabic language through their poetry. That's actually how they say you know the language of the Arab is through poetry. So even if you look at Arabic dictionaries, they always refer to a word and its usage through the poetry of the Arabs. Okay? That if it's used in this couplet or in this line, then this is how the Arabs use this word, this is how they understood this word. And the poetry of the Arabs, as they say also, they have tabaqat, meaning, I mean, you use the same word in Arabic, right? They have categories in which they actually say that there are levels in which the poetry is understood to be eloquent, and it is understood also to be a source of how we understand the Arabic language. And guess what? The most eloquent of the Arabs are either the generation that precedes the Prophet directly, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, there's actually a poetry that's still studied today to kind of master the Arabic language called the Sab'a Mu'allaqat. They were the 7 poets that their works were actually pasted on the Kaaba. Right, because they were considered basically like the masters of their time. So their works were actually pasted on the Kaaba. Right, now that poetry, for instance, is considered to be kind of like the authority of what is the Arabic language. And also the poets living in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, while he was alive. Okay, now every generation after that, then there's said to be a decline in the authenticity and the understanding of the Arabic language. And that happens, because, just frankly speaking, that's the nature of how language works, because that's the nature of how people work, especially when you look at it historically. When the Arabs move from their traditional home of Hijaz, okay, and they move throughout the different parts of the world, all the way to Spain, to China, and they start mixing with these people, even through marriage. Many of the khulafa and the kings that ruled in the times of the Umayyad and the Abbasiyya dynasties, a lot of them, their mothers were not Arab. Like Abdul Malik ibn Marwan was one of them. He was known to make a lot of mistakes when he spoke Arabic, and his mother was Persian. You see? So essentially, again, just even when you start leaving your home and you travel abroad, case in point, your children come here, they're raised in America, is their Urdu as good as yours? It's just natural, right? Things happen. So as the Arabs move out and they start to intermingle and so forth and so on, the language becomes, this is actually why Arabic literature at that time, interestingly enough, reached its peak. Like the masters of, they call it Arabic grammar and Arabic rhetoric. It all happened at that time of the Umayyad and Abbasiyya, because basically that's what was going on. There was so much mixing going on that even their own children started to speak Arabic poorly, so they said, okay, look, we got to do something about this. And they started creating this literature in order to keep the Arabic language pristine, which, if again, is part of the miraculous nature of actually the Quran, because Allah promises, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun." We revealed this dhikr, meaning the Quran, and we will indeed protect it. So, part of the meaning of this ayah is not that just the text alone of the Quran, but anything that's related to it. So that includes the language, meaning the Arabic language, and that also includes things like the Sunnah, the ways of the Prophet ﷺ, because that is the context of the Quran. All of that will be preserved as well, which we see that's what happened, intellectually and historically. And why am I mentioning that? Because if it wasn't for this ayah, if it wasn't for the promise of Allah that He would protect the Quran, the Arabic language would have been lost a long time ago. Because modern Arabs, if you listen to their lehja, what is called, there's the Fusha Arabic, there's what they call the pristine Arabic, which is still used pretty much so in terms of things like, on the news channels, and newscasters use it. Usually in universities and so forth, they use a more pristine Arabic. But everyday language on the street, right, what they call the lehja, or the different, types of, if you want to call it colloquial Arabic that's spoken in Egypt or in Morocco or in Dubai or in any other place of the Arab world, it is definitely different. And you give it another 200 years, it'll become another language. Not even that long. Some may even argue that Egyptian has become its own language already. Egyptians themselves, like it's already become something that's not really that pure Arabic, okay? So if it was up to just the normal way that the world works, human beings and languages, the Arabic language would have been definitely changed a long time ago. But the only reason why we have it preserved is because of this promise of Allah, that He would preserve the Quran. So part of preserving the Quran obviously has to do with preserving the language, because if you study, of course, again, other nations, in the Jewish tradition, when they were brought to captivity in Babylon, right? They lost the Torah and they even lost their language. This is well known. In other words, the original Hebrew and Ibrani that their forefathers spoke was lost. So today, when they study Hebrew, it's interesting that some of them, even back in Israel, they actually study Arabic first before they can study traditional Hebrew, because they're that far away and removed from really understanding what original Hebrew was like, to the point too that they don't even know how really certain letters would have been pronounced, which is again another miracle, because the science of tajweed, for instance, in the Quran is so precise that we know definitively, okay, how to pronounce even these letters. And to the extent that we not only know, we know exactly where what's called makharij, where the letter comes from, first of all. Like Hamza comes from the bottom of your throat, And then we even know their qualities. When you pronounce Hamza, air doesn't flow. So technically when you say a'udhu, you shouldn't feel air coming out of your mouth and hitting your finger. That's actually a way of knowing whether you're pronouncing it right or not. A'udhu, a'udhu. You see? Now how much meticulous detail is there to even the letter? Okay, that even the letter itself, we have preserved how it's pronounced. And the other part of the miraculous nature, let's compare that to the other nations when I said they lost their language, right? Let alone the text itself. The text is preserved, the language is preserved, and the language is also preserved by non-Arabs. Which also adds to the miraculous nature of it all. Like Sibawayh was a master of Arabic grammar. He was Persian. Arabic was not his mother tongue. In fact, the story is the reason why he wrote this book called Al-Kitab. That's how boisterous he was. The book, right, which is his masterpiece of Arabic grammar, is because Arabs would make fun of him when he spoke Arabic because he had that accent, that Persian accent. So he got mad and he decided to write Al-Kitab. To show them that you can make fun of my accent, but I know Arabic better than you, kind of thing going on, huh? Okay, but still we see that is also part of the miraculous nature of it, is that, you know, mashallah, even in this preservation, it wasn't just the Arabs, it was even non-Arabs. So it shows you what? That this has everything to do with not just a people and a language, it has everything to do with wahi, revelation from God. And there is no other explanation for it, if you will. Okay? So, now that's a long divergence from, but all I'm trying to say is basically, even amongst the Arabs who were the most eloquent Arabs, okay, and again, as I made the point earlier, if you look at the very beginning of this surah, Alif Lam Mim. So that's Allah's way of telling these Arabs at that time who had that fakhr and that pride that we know our language, and we know it so well that nobody knows it as well as we do. And our poetry, in fact, Ajami. Ajami is a word that used, a non-Arab is called Ajami. Its original meaning is an animal that cannot speak. Not that it's not some kind of white supremacist, like, you know, we're not talking about, this is well before social Darwinism and white supremacy, right? So they're not trying to say that, you know, non-Arabs are animals. What they're trying to say is animals don't know how to speak clearly, right? They can't express themselves, they just make noises. So for them, a non-Arab is they're just making noises. They don't know what they're trying to say, okay? Like, what's this person saying, right? They're just opening their mouth and saying, ah, right? Just like an animal. So he's Ajmi or she's Ajmiya, right? Like they're non-Arab. You see what I'm saying? Whereas Arabic for them was a source of pride because it's always supposed to be clarity. Okay, and even in that, that's why some of the people say that Rasulullah was described as having a bigger mouth, so to speak. Why? Because for the Arabs, that's beauty. Why? Because in order to speak Arabic, you have to open your mouth a lot. A'udhu, right? You have to move everything, your mouth, your tongue, your lips. So the more you can do that, the better it is. The more clear you are. You can hear everything that you're trying to say. There's no ambiguity. Yet with all of that, what does Allah do? He tells them there are things that are mutashabihat. With all of your your absolute, just, how can I put it? Your eloquence. Still, I can use your language and say things and put across ideas that you will have no idea what's going on. Right? For instance, let me take some letters and say alif lam mim and have you figure it out. Okay, and then even they were stumped and said, what? We have no idea. What is that supposed to mean? Alif lam mim. It's your language, isn't it? These are not even words, these are letters. And you're so good at expressing your language, and right? And you're so proud of yourselves, yet I can say something using your language that you have no idea what I'm talking about. It's interesting that, in the Surah, Abu Sufyan and a few other people used to go and listen to the Prophet ﷺ in nighttime in Tahajjud when he was reciting Quran. And then they would catch each other in the morning time. What were you doing? He was like, listening to the Prophet ﷺ. Well, why? We were telling everyone else not to believe in him, and if they see us doing this, they're going to question us. They'll know, why are you listening to him so ardently that you were spending the whole night, all right, enthralled just to hear what's going on? At the end of the story, though, Abu Sufyan did say one thing. He said that we understand a lot of what he says, meaning we understand a lot of the Quran, but there's a lot of it too that we don't understand. Okay. There's a lot of things, in other words, that are said and we hear that we're not too clear about. So that would be categorized as what? Mutashabihat. So, bottom line is this: does the Quran contain things of this nature? The answer is yes. There are certain things that even for people who it was their language and they had the mastery of that language, there were things that they were not too clear about. What exactly is intended here? We're not sure. Okay, now that's an important point because, again, we go back to the other discussion, which is that the revelation of this ayah had everything to do with this. Even some of the surah has everything to do with the Christians of Banu Najran, Arab Christians who came to the Prophet ﷺ and tried to debate with him. And they would bring up things primarily that were mutashabihat. Okay? So, what about this? What about Allah saying that Isa alayhi salam is ruhum min, is a soul from him, minhu? Okay? Again, an Arab would hear those things and understand the words. But what it means in this context, not too clear. What is that supposed to mean? A soul from him, literally. Okay, like min would denote that it's literally like, like as if it was extracted from him, or it came from him, or it began from him, or any of those things. You see what I'm saying? So now they're saying they're trying to do what? They're trying to confuse the Muslims. They see you guys are saying the same thing we are. What is it? Jesus is part of the Godhead. See? Look what your own Quran says. He's a soul from him. وَكَلِمَتُهُ أَلْقَاهَا, that he is his word. Idafa, right? His word, something that belongs to you, or it even could be part of you. Like I can say, this is my yadi, this is my hand, meaning it's a part of me. Okay? So you see how they're playing the games? Right? Look at this. This is what the Quran says. So actually you guys and you are agreeing with us in the Trinity and all these other things. So what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about this? He said that people who in their hearts there is waywardness, right? Zayghun. Zayg literally means to go astray from the path that you're supposed to be on. If they have something in their heart, then what do? فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ. Then whatever is not so clear in regards to the Quran, they will follow it, meaning they will try and stick to that. Not to what is clear and known, but they'll stick to things that are ambiguous to you to do what? To cause ibtiqal fitna, to cause a trial and temptation for people. In other words, to cause trouble, right? To cause confusion. That, oh, but what about this? And what about that? And how about this ayah? Okay. Then, what does Allah say? Okay. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. However, no one will actually know what is truly intended. Meaning could never clarify these ambiguous verses, like exactly what does that mean? What is the nature of ruh min? Okay? No one will know that except Allah Himself. Then وَرَاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ, those people who are deeply entrenched in knowledge, which is an important point because some people have said that this means that there are people who are deeply rooted in knowledge, which excludes the average man and woman. Okay, it excludes the average person. This is not, in other words, this here, وَرَاسِخُونَ, even the fact that there's alif lam, there's lam wa ta'rif, it makes it very specific. So there are few people, exclusive, an exclusive club, if you will. وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ are described as being deeply rooted in knowledge, meaning their knowledge is not just at a surface level, but they have a very deep understanding of things, which means that their knowledge is well-rounded, not only the outward sciences like poetry and the Arabic language and so forth and so on, but even inwardly, meaning there has to be, as in the end of the ayah, ulul albab, there has to be a level of a higher intelligence here to be able to comprehend certain things at a higher level. So this is not for everybody. Do you understand the point? It's not for everybody. Not everyone is going to understand these things. And even that includes amongst even the Sahaba. Okay? Amongst the Sahaba too, there were people who would be considered of a higher level of understanding and knowledge. And usually those are the type of people like Ali anhu, for instance. He said, this is in the beginning of Sahih Muslim, the famous hadith book, where he said that you should speak to people at the level of their intellect or their intelligence. Because you don't want them to do what? To deny Allah and His Prophet ﷺ. Because if you describe certain ideas and concepts to them that's beyond their understanding, they may end up denying them. So it's better to speak at everyone be what? At what? With the level of intellect that they're able to understand. What does that show? And Ali anhu was one of those people that swore by Allah that he knows the meanings of the Quran. So what is he trying to say? He's trying to say almost the same thing. That yes, certain people may understand the depths of these mutashabihat, but they are not everybody. And even they are not to explain even at times the meanings of these things to everyone, because it would actually create more problems than it will good. Okay, if you're not firmly rooted in the first principle, which is what? The muhkamat, and those things which are clearly understood, they make, as it said here, hunna ummul kitab. They are the mother, meaning they are the basis, the premise, and they are the what we go back to. Literally, is your root, right? Where do you come from? Your mother. Where's the root? It's your mother. So why is the word used? Because it's like saying where you come from, where everything that we have what we will understand from the Quran, its root and origin goes back always to the muhkamat, which whereby we derive a principle. If something for other people, meaning we're not going to claim we're the rasikhuna fil ilm, right? We're not going to claim we're like the people who are up there in terms of our knowledge and we understand these things. So we'll just put ourselves in the category of normal people. Huh? What does a normal person do? The principle is this. The basis of the book is the muhkamat. Meaning the Quran is understood by those things which are clear. And whenever there's something ambiguous, how will you understand it? By going back to what is clear. Okay? By going back to what is clear. That's how you'll understand it. Does it make sense? Okay, now there's a long-winded discussion. Just this ayah alone, which I'm not going to delve into, which caused, some great debates in the history.
Can someone keep on digging and just climb up and, find the shabihat, understand what they mean?
That's what some scholars claim. The majority of people will say no, and that's again, this is where the long discussion, even in the wording of the ayah, like in the Arabic when you say وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ, they're trying to say this is almost like having a comma. Okay, what's ataf, which is like, you're starting another subject. Now, if that's how you're going to take the meaning, then what it would mean, وَلَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ, then the meaning would be translated as nobody knows the explanation or the true meaning of the mutashabihat except Allah. And then وَالرَّاسِخُونَ will actually be a separate sentence. Jumlatul musta'nifa, which means it's a separate subject altogether. And most of the Sahaba and most of the scholars take and prefer that opinion, how we understand the ayah. That would mean that only Allah knows the true meanings of these things. And those even that are deeply rooted in knowledge just simply say that it's all from Allah, amanna. We believe in it, we accept it. Okay? That's the majority of people would prefer that explanation. Some, small group of people have said, no, actually, it's a continuation of the subject. It's not another subject in itself, which would mean that the translation is nobody knows their true meanings except Allah and those deeply rooted in knowledge. Which would imply that yes, those who are deeply rooted in knowledge can somehow know and understand the meanings of the mutashabihat. Okay? Alright. But again, that would imply two things. Number one, that this is only exclusively for some people. It's not for everybody. And it's not for every, as the expression goes, Tom, Dick, and Harry, to understand what the mutashabihat are. But these are people who are warasikhuna fil ilm. Okay? And normally when we read, what people like that, like I mentioned, Ali anhu, because he's one of them, right? And you would see that he doesn't go off on these tangents to explain these things to people generally. And as I said, he actually said to do what? Talk to people according to the level of intellect. So if he did know these things, he didn't share it with everybody. Okay, you understand my point? Like if he did know, he didn't share it with everyone. So we don't find it recorded that they went into detail about all of these things. Certain things they just left ambiguous because it's better off that way for most people. Why? Because they still have a golden rule which they can rely on that would take away all the confusion, which is if something's ambiguous, always refer it back to something that's unambiguous or muhakamat. I'll give you a simple example without trying to delve into the long controversy that is created amongst some Muslims about particularly, and I'm going to give an example from this issue, or regarding this issue, that particularly in regards to the sifat and the attributes of Allah, the attributes of God. So, as an example, just to give an example, Yadullahi fawqa aydihim. So if you translated yad, you would literally say the hand. The hand of God is above their hands. So the word yad, okay, so every Arab knows what it means, correct? I mean, no Arab, if they're actually an Arab, would hear the word yad and not know what it is. Okay, so okay, yad, hand. Okay, now there, what's the problem? Yad Allah, the hand of Allah. Now what are you talking about? So you know the word, you see how it's with the shabihat, you know what the word is, but when you relate it to Allah, now what does it mean? Right, now we're stumped. Well, if you say it's a physical hand, like a human being, then you're actually going against what is muhkam, what is definitely understood by the Quran, which is, as an example, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like Allah. So that's a very clear, unambiguous verse which categorically states that there's literally nothing. Mithl is literally means there's nothing that you can make a comparison with to Allah. There's no similarity, in other words. If there is no similarity between Allah and His creation, then can you understand this to be something like a physical limb? No. So then what is it? You see how the question came? So then what is it then? Because Allah said it, so there must mean something. So then what does it mean then? Okay? That's what the Shabi had. The easier way to go, which is what most people had advised the Ummah to go, is that take the mutashabihat, meaning in this case the word yad, and refer back to the muhakamat, what is definitive. And what is definitive is there's no similarity whatsoever. Laysa kamithlihi shay literally is so emphatic, and like there's literally no mithl, no similarity whatsoever between Allah and His creation. So therefore yad could never be understood as a physical limb. Alright? That's the easy way to go out. However, is it a description that God has used for Himself? Because that's the whole word sifa means what? A description, right? How something is described. So if I asked you to describe something, whatever it is, then your description, that's what it's called, right? They have sifat. There's a description. So is it a description of God? Can you say, for instance, the hand of God is over their hands, or this is in the hand of God? The answer is yes, you can. Why? Because God Himself has used this description. However, how you understand that description, though, is a different issue. So how you understand that description should never be anthropomorphic, or what they call tashbih or tajsim, right? That's categorically denied. But the controversy only comes in where people get into very detailed nitpicking of exactly what does that word mean. Okay, and again, this would become even a more long-winded discussion if I really delved into this historically, which groups and who said what and why. We'd be here for the rest of the session. But the easy way, وَرَاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ, leave that up to them if they're going to discuss these things. The easy way out for every person other than that is to do what? Refer the mutashabihat back to the muhkamat. Right? These things cannot be understood anthropomorphically or in tajseem, as they call it in Arabic, because Allah has categorically stated, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ. There is no similitude or similarity between Allah and literally anything. When we say anything, we mean anything that exists. So anything your small human mind can wrap its mind around, it can wrap it, can conjure up, that's included in all things that exist, right? There's plenty of things that exist that we still don't know about. So all of it, Allah says, between that and Allah, there is no similarity whatsoever. So if you can imagine it, what does that mean? That's not Allah. Hence the famous saying by many shuyukh, وَمَا خَطَرَ فِي بَالِكَ, whatever your mind can conjure up, whatever you can imagine, فَاللَّهُ مُخَالِفٌ لِذَلِكَ, Allah is the exact opposite of that. Allah is the exact opposite of that. So if you can think of it, that's not your creator. If you can imagine it and conjure up this image in your head, that's not your creator. Your creator is not like anything. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Literally no equivalent whatsoever.
How do people interpret the verse, we created the man in our image?
Well, that's not a, first of all, actually, to clarify, that's not it's not in the Quran. There's no Quran, it's in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament. It's in the Genesis, in the very beginning, right? But there is no ayah. There's a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ, a person was about to be killed for a penal punishment, okay? And he told them to turn his face away and not to hit him in his face or strike him in his face, because basically this is what the hadith pretty much so says, that Adam was created in his image, or he was created. See, that's where the explanation of it is again, it gets lengthy, but the explanation of it for some is that the dhamir, the pronoun of he, doesn't return to Allah, it returns to Adam alayhi salam. Meaning he was created in his image, meaning Adam's image.
Like he wasn't a baby when he was born. He was born the way, he was created the way he was as an adult.
No, meaning that his face or his
right.
image is the same as Adam's alayhi salam. Meaning that, he's a human being and human beings should be honored, basically.
Right. But there was someone who said, like this once, someone that was mentioning that what it means is like that, so when Adam alayhi salam was created, human beings usually are born.
Yeah.
And they go through different stages and
Okay.
they grow into adulthood. So he was born he was created as an adult in his own image, like the way he was supposed to look for the rest of his life.
Okay.
Is that what it?
I mean, I've never heard that, but it could be. But one of the more plausible is that explanation, meaning his image, whose image? Adam's image, alayhi salam. Another thing that Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala offers as an explanation of that is that by his image, surah, okay, the word surah, even in surat comes from surah, the same Arabic word. And this is literally the word that's used in this hadith. Surah doesn't always have to be physical. Okay, surah can also include things like will, power, the ability, right, to do things in which we share in common with Allah. In that sense, we have those attributes as well. We have free will, we have power and ability to do what we want, our will, to enforce our will. You understand? So it doesn't mean a physical, again, because if you say it's physical, then are you making something similar to Allah? The answer is, of course. Does that contradict the Quran? The answer also would be what? Yes. It contradicts the Quran and clear any type of logical, any type of reasoning that we use, we can conclude that God cannot be like his creation, right? So basically, that's one explanation. And also you have to remember, again, go back to the things that are muhkamat. Allah says he's al-musawwir. Al-musawwir comes from surah, the one who creates images. The one who creates the outward form. Okay? Right? Fi ayyi suratin ma sha'a rakkabak. And again, the word surah is used in this ayah. Like Allah creates you in any form that he so wills. He puts you together in parts. So if creation has a surah and he's al-musawwir, You get the point? What do you conclude from that? Can there any similarity here suggested? What would be the answer? No. You see what I'm saying? But just to clarify, that actually isn't an ayah, that's actually from the Bible, but there is a hadith that mentions something similar to that. But again, the hadith can be explained in this way. Either the pronoun does not refer to Allah, it refers to Adam alayhi salam, okay? Or it refers to not something like a physical shape that he has created, that he is the creator of. Because again, if it's created, he's not like his creation. But it refers to something else.
Just another quick question. Given, the importance of Arabic at the time of the Prophet, how unusual was it that he could not read or write? Was that very unusual at that time, or?
No, it wasn't. It was actually very common. There were very few Arabs who actually knew how to read and write during the time, and not just Arabs, actually even in the civilized world, so-called, the great civilizations at that time, amongst the Romans and the Persians, it wasn't common people didn't know how to read and write. You have to literally be the elite. It wasn't like, modern education gives us this impression that now, mashallah, literacy is at its highest point in history. Historically speaking, literacy right now is at its highest point. At that time, literacy was not common, period. Okay, and especially amongst the Arabs, because they weren't a quote-unquote civilized people, so they didn't have a formal way of education. Amongst the Persians and the Greeks, that actually the Byzantine Empire were actually Greek, right? It was the Roman Empire, yes, but they were Greek, right? There was a long-standing tradition of education, but education to whom? Everybody? No. You understand? Education to only select few people. Right? It wasn't available for everyone like it is now, again. So it wasn't uncommon. What was uncommon, and that's why sometimes even how we translate ummi we should be careful. It wasn't the fact that he couldn't read or write, it's the fact that he was never formally educated. Okay, nobody sat down and taught him, for instance, how to be a poet. It's not. This is the primary point. Nobody sat down with him and taught him how to be a poet, right? And how to express certain things in certain ways. That's something anyone could have done even if they didn't read and write. Right? They could have sat down, or nobody sat down with him, for instance, as another example that the Quran used. Nobody from amongst the Jews and Christians sat down and taught him about the previous scriptures or religions. That's the miraculous nature. Nobody taught him these things formally. So I use the word, he wasn't formally educated. So if nobody sat down and they knew that, meaning his people, his tribe, and the Arabs around him understood that, they knew that nobody ever taught him these things. He never learned poetry, and he never learned about the other religions. So where is this coming from then? Right? That would be the big question at that point. So where is all this coming from? Is he just that clever that he just knows how to make these things up as he goes? Or is there something else going on here?
And there was also very rich oral tradition.
Yes, of course. Right. So that again, like you didn't need to know how to read or write, but you did need still a teacher, if you will.
Yes.
You needed a peer, someone who could sit down and, hey, let's recite these couplets and let's, talk about how we can, be original in our version of poetry or whatever. Like that usually requires some type of training. Very rarely do you find people that are just natural, right? They always follow some kind of pattern or school of thought. So I hate to use the example of, may Allah forgive me, but even in hip hop here in America, right? Most of the time these guys come from backgrounds, they're not educated. Yet they're able to say things and express things that are really, if you just get past all the other bad, but they're very clever. Very clever. How do they learn that? They don't learn that in school. You understand what I'm saying? They don't go to school and learn that. They just sit around with their friends and they make up things, right? Until someone masters the ability of rhyming, right? And making sense at the same time and expressing things in rhyme and prose. It's similar to that. You don't need a school to do that. So but you still need what? You still need someone there to kind of, to be as an example or to coach you. And that's the whole point, is the Prophet ﷺ never had that. He never engaged in those type of gatherings where people would recite poetry and, their drinking bouts and then brag about this, that, and that's how usually what poetry was back in those days too. It wasn't much different from hip hop in that extent. Yeah, it was all about bragging about I'm this, I'm that, I did this and did the other thing. And then the other person would say, well, I'm this and I'm that. Right? If you read the poetry of the Jahiliyyah, a lot of it wasn't that deep, except for a few. There were some that expressed some deep, but most of it was just braggadocious, whatever, I'm the man, my tribe's the best, or whatever, Nobody has been much of a debauching, womanizing drunkard than me, right? Like, that's usually what it is. Nobody has done that as much as I am, so, right? That's all it is, basically. There's not much deep, but still, it's a skill, and it's a skill that's acquired usually. Although that's an interesting subject, we get to it at one point in time. Like in every science, not just poetry, art, I would dare even say science itself, which is so empirical and so cold-hearted data, right? Every science, though, there's a certain point where inspiration is a big key to how people accomplish amazing things. True or not? There's a certain point where it's not just using cold, hard data or rules, or following the rules of rhyme and prose, following the rules of how to draw this and draw that, and there's a certain point where inspiration plays a big key, which is interesting. That comes later. Right? So sometimes poems, that's why there's, even after the Prophet ﷺ, there's a famous poet whose name was Al-Mutanabbi, which literally means one who's claiming to be a Nabi, a prophet. Because his poetry was so inspired, so to speak, that he actually ended up, at one point in time, he rescinded that, but he ended up claiming that there was some type of divine inspiration there, And, so people get inspiration for sure, that's for sure. So there's a point, but that's what they were asking these people, that if he's never been around, nor has been trained or learned from poets, nor has he been trained or learned from the Ahlul Kitab, the people before you. So then you explain why now, at 40 years after his life is, he's accomplished, he's got money, he's got a good wife, good family, everything that a man would want, and now he risks all of that for what? Right? Why is he going to rock the boat all of a sudden? Usually 40-something years old men, when they have all that, they usually are thinking about what? Retirement. Right? It's time now to relax. I've done everything. Life is done. I'm good. Money's there, children are good, wife is good, everyone's good. Time to do this, right? Why would a man at that age decide to all of a sudden create a problem for everybody? Literally, when he came home to Khadija anha, and the first revelation, he said, there's no peace left, no raha left for our family. Now, once I say this in front of my people, he knew what was coming, right? And that's what happened. They all went through incredible hardships. Willingly, like I say again, even using reason, that doesn't make sense. Does it make any sense? Why would a man do that? So there's so much there, but that's part of it. So unlettered is, I think, maybe we just say not formally educated. That's maybe a little bit more appropriate. Umar anhu was one of the few people that did know how to write. Amongst the companions, for instance. He actually knew how to write the Arabic alphabet. And obviously there were others, because he did have people writing down the Quran, and even Hadith too, which is a common misconception. That did happen. And also things like, for instance, Zakat, how to pay Zakat, what should be paid. There are actually books that were written during the time of the Prophet ﷺ at his request, that people wrote these things down. What's more interesting is there's records of him correcting people. When they wrote certain things down. So that also kind of shakes the idea that he was, again, wow, right? So I think not formally educated is the best way to put it. Right? So that why? The wisdom behind that is that no person can claim that he learned this from somebody. You see? That this has to be divine, or there's some inspiration. Eventually they got so frustrated, okay, there's inspiration, but it's jinn. Ma bi sahibikum min jinnah, meaning Allah would refute that. He said he's not touched by jinn. Jinn don't come to people like this.
But even now, people say that he learned all this on his trade routes. Like he used to go and trade with the Christians, and he used to go
Right.
And that's how he learned. But,
And exactly what was the refutation of that? Is that they spoke in a different language.
right.
You see? And he only knew that language at that time, Arabiya. So all these things, the Quran answers itself. Like, yeah, fine, maybe you could make that argument if on the way he stopped with such and such a monk or something like that. But they spoke a totally different language. Yeah? And even, that's what they're trying to say, even in language, things get lost in translation, especially something like that. If he spent years there, okay, then maybe we can say, yeah, there's something to doubt here. He spent some time. But just passing by someone and talking to them briefly for a couple of minutes in a different language, that's not enough to say you really understood, or, especially, again, all the context. So yes, all those things are answered as well. Right? So that in essence, eventually they got so frustrated they can only come up with one answer. That yes, it's inspiration, but it's not from Allah. This is just he's majnoon, he's crazy, or sha'irun majnoon, or he's got jinn bothering him. That's what it is. We'll come get an amal to get the jinn out of him or something. It's just abnormal, which is also interesting. It goes back to the other point. Sometimes that's why they recognized even that certain people's inspiration was from that side of things. Right? You ever, I'm sorry to use examples of pop culture, but it does tell us something. There's, what is his name? Robert something. Famous guitarist from in America, an African American who inspired people like Led Zeppelin and all that, right? A lot of his songs he used to talk about, which people don't pay attention to, that he sold his soul to the devil to learn how to play so well, right? And people are just, where are they coming up with these, right? This is not a normal, we're not, just using what we would normally teach you in music school, and this guy's playing like, wow, where did that come from? You understand? He said, well, in his own words, he said what? Sold my soul to the devil. Meaning his inspiration is coming from somewhere. Where did it come from? Right? Even Jimi Hendrix, you can't say that it was all just he was doing a lot of drugs. So there was there was something else there, like making him get those creative juices going, right? So literally there is a point of human creativity that doesn't come exactly from where? Just your own abilities. Another example, Hassan ibn Thabit, the poet of the Prophet ﷺ, in hadith of Muslim and others, a strong hadith, the Prophet ﷺ literally said that Jibreel ﷺ was inspiring him. Ayyadahu, and he was giving him, meaning that his poetry is literally being inspired by Jibreel ﷺ, if you can imagine. Now, of course, he's not a prophet, right? But the point being that his words were being inspired. They weren't just coming from him alone. There was other things going on there that made him able to express things in the way that he did. So, something that the modern mind, again, we don't talk about often. Everything is so quantified that we don't allow ourselves that ability to say that, no, there's a point where human beings get from some other source. Right? Our inspiration and our ideas come from somewhere else. Okay, so khair. So that kind of, I hope, sums up the issue without going into, again, long, detailed discussions of it. The muhkamat and mutashabihat, and how intellectually and historically, it's been interesting discussion amongst many people in the Muslim Ummah. Okay. How we understand these things. But the golden rule is, for those who are not deeply rooted, وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ, if something is ambiguous, always refer it back. Even a hadith like that, always refer it back to what? Something that is conclusive, something that is absolutely 100% understood and not up for dispute. The basis of all of that when it comes to Allah's attribute, of course, is laysa kamithlihi shay. There is nothing whatsoever like Allah. There's no similitude at all between Allah and His creation. So nothing from Allah's attributes or descriptions can be understood that way. Does it make sense? MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair. So, where are we? Just try. ربنا, I'm going to skip something. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. So this is the dua that the Quran teaches us. That is, oh Allah, don't let our hearts go wayward after you have guided us, but rather gift us from you. And hab, literally from, wahaba yahibu, which means to gift something. Where the word of, or the name of Allah afterwards comes al-wahhab. So when you gift something to someone, the idea is that you give them not based on any merit, that they deserve it, but you give them out of your own goodwill. You understand? And also that once you give it, another point that some ulama make is that once you give it, you don't take it back. So the indication here is why is we see, look at the dua and think about why is it related? This name of Allah, they're never unrelated. Whatever name of Allah is being used here, whatever wording is being used, there's a reason for it. So you're asking that Allah guides, never lets your heart go astray after you've been guided. And then you say He is Al-Wahhab, meaning if you have gifted me with guidance, then be Al-Wahhab, meaning that after giving that gift, you will never take it back. That it's done. Once He gives it, it's done. You understand? So the name of Allah is related to this directly. If you've gifted me to be guided, then never take that gift back. You are Al-Wahhab, meaning once you give a gift, then it's a done deal. You can't take it back with a receipt and say, it doesn't work like that. You didn't buy it, you got it, meaning it was gifted. And the gifts of the Creator are never taken back. Make sense? So this is the relationship between the dua and the name of Allah Al-Wahhab. So رَبَّنَا إِنَّكَ جَامِعُ النَّاسِ لِيَوْمٍ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُخْلِفُ الْمِيعَادَ. And indeed, O Allah, you will gather all people on a day that there is no doubt about. And indeed, Allah will not go back from His promises, meaning He has promised to gather people together on the day of Qiyamah, and that is inevitable. Nobody and nothing can stop that from happening. Now I'm going to skip a few ayah, because we're going to start another subject, and then, if we can't do it, today, we'll do it in the next section, which we will go to ayah number 14, in which Allah Azza wa Jalla states, زُوِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ وَالْبَنِينَ وَالْقَنَاطِيرِ الْمُنْقَنطَرَةِ مِنَ الذَّهَبِ وَالْفِضَّةِ وَالْخَيْلِ الْمُسَوَّمَةِ وَالْأَنْعَامِ وَالْحَرْثِ ذَلِكَ مَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَاللَّهُ عِنْدَهُ حُسْنُ الْمَآبِ, which is roughly that the love of desires have been embellished for mankind, meaning in the hearts of mankind, it has been literally zuyina. In the Arabic is what they call al-fi'l majhul. How do I describe that? Let's go back to some English grammar and see if I can somehow figure it out. So al-fi'l ma'ruf is a verb in which the subject and the object are clearly stated. Okay? Like, I hit the boy. So you have the verb and you also have the subject and the object. I is the subject and then boy is the object, correct? Okay? So in Arabic it works the same way. Right? ضربت غلاما, I hit a boy, or al-ghulama, that boy. When you want to say something that something happened to someone or something, but you don't know, the subject is not really mentioned, or the person doing it, in other words. The active participle is not mentioned. Then you use majhul. So in this case, zuyyina would mean that it has been embellished. Who did the embellishing? Who made it that way? That's not mentioned. Okay? All that is mentioned is that it has been done. Zuyyina. Okay? This is also interesting because the same type of form is used in probably, for us, I don't have a problem with it, but for some people it's infamous, but a famous hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, Hubbiba ilayya thalath. There are three things that have been made beloved to me. Hubbiba, meaning I was made to love these things. At-tib wa nisa wa qurratu ayni fi salah. Perfume, women, and the coolness of my eyes is in salah. So the idea is that the Prophet ﷺ said if it's hubbiba, it's not his own choice. It wasn't something that he himself decided this is how it's going to be. It's something that was embedded in him, the love of these things. Same thing goes here. Zuyyina lin-nas, meaning it's not something that human beings necessarily choose. Like, you don't wake up one morning and say, you know what, I really like these things. But rather the idea is that these things are just kind of inherently part of us. Make sense? Zuyyina lin-nas. In other words, and again, if you look at the wording, lin-nas, an-nas here is mu'arraf, meaning that it is the whole, if you want to take it that way, there's even ways to break that down, which would take too long. Just the word itself, just the letter itself, linnas, all right, just using the lam here, an alif lam, people could break that down grammatically even to the point where they can get very specific. And what would they mean by all of that without getting into details? Mankind as a whole species. Mankind in general. Human beings in general. They have in them, zuyyina, that in them, there is embedded in them the love of these desires. Okay? So in other words, these shahawat, these desires, are part of you. Which indicates that no one should assume that it is natural for you not to have these desires. Matter of fact, it's what? It's the opposite. You should automatically assume, being that if you're part of this category, an-nas, right, you claim that you're a human being, correct, I believe. You're not an alien or something, or a jinn, right? So you're a human being? Okay. Then if you're a human being, you're part of this category. So if you're a human being, these affections and these desires become natural. Okay? They become natural. The first thing that Allah mentions, and again, hopefully the ladies won't get offended. The first thing Allah says out of all of it, min an-nisa, women. Wal-baneen, and children. The idea being that the strongest desires we have are for those things that are similar to us, of the same category, of the same species. So your attraction and your desire is stronger for those things that are what? Similar to you. There's mutajanisa. So why women are mentioned and then children? Because obviously this implies that two things, obviously. Procreation and children, because they are also part of who? You. Right? And usually children are a replica of some sort of their parents. So you're more attracted, as the saying in Arabic goes, al-jinsu yamilu ila al-jins. It's kind of like the English equivalent of the birds of a feather flock together. So always your attraction, your jadb, will always be stronger for things that are similar to you. Which also goes back to the other previous week's discussion of compatibility in marriage. Usually the best marriages are those actually that have some similarity. Because there's going to be, human beings are curious. They always want something that's different, right? That happens. But normally, what's a stronger attraction are people or couples or anyone that has what? Similarity. Even spiritually. So the famous hadith in Bukhari and others, and probably you've heard before, where the Prophet ﷺ was asked about, when Ali asked about when you walk into a room and sometimes you just feel a connection with someone that you've never met before. And so the Prophet ﷺ answered by saying, Al-arwahu jundun mujaddada, that the human souls were placed together before they came into this world. So when there's that, when there's that similarity, in other words, when you were with a certain type. So normally, human beings are attracted to what? Same type. And there's a stronger attraction for the same type that there is for anything else. So of all of the shahawat that we have, what is the strongest? The birds and the bees. Because it's the same, it's like, if you want to get into it, I hate to sound goofy and romantic, but when people say, you complete me and all that kind of nonsense, right? Right, because that's what it is. You have literally, and again, in the Surah Al-Rum, the ayah that everyone likes to recite in weddings, right? وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُم. This is the key word, azwajin. He created spouses from you. The word literally is what? Min anfusik, from you. So it's literally as if you have a part of you somewhere. And then you have to go find it and bring it, right? That's me somewhere, I'm missing it, and then you bring it, it's from you. But again, there's no stronger force in a person's life than their what? Their nafs, them, right? What they are. So the first and strongest attraction that people have in their shahawat is obviously this. And then children. Because children become a part of that. They also represent you. After that, of course, comes the very material things. After that part, even if that seems, it's not so mundane, there is a little bit more to it than, mashallah, being attracted to the same, and having children, there's something more to it. But then we get from there to the what? The very material things. First thing that Allah says, al-qanatir are just simply put vast amounts of wealth. Okay? Al-munqantara would mean that it is basically like your savings. Anything that you store up and pile up and you don't spend. So large amounts of wealth, vast treasures of wealth. You can also say from what? Gold and silver, the bling bling. So everyone likes the what? Everyone likes the bling bling. Right? They like to look at it, they like to wear it, they like to store it up, they like to, right? How we replaced it with green dollar bills, only Allah knows, because that's actually supposed to be your legal tender, right? That's supposed to be the amount of gold that you have. So the original wealth is what? Gold and silver. And people love to, stack it up, big piles. They can just look at it. So that's the next thing Allah says. After all that, then you have the material things. You have the big stored up piles of gold and silver. And وَالْخَيْلِ الْمُسَوَّمَةِ, literally, horses that are marked. Okay, horses that are marked by their owners to let everyone know that it's theirs. Now we can kind of replace that with Porsche and BMW and Rolls Royce. If we took the BMW, the Mercedes symbol, and the Rolls Royce and the Porsche symbol out off of your car, I bet you a lot of money that people would be a little less interested. It's all the branding. That's literally what it means, a branded horse. You brand it so everyone knows that this is mine, right? When I'm going down the thoroughbred, everyone knows it's so-and-so's horse. Wow, look at that. So nobody wants a car that doesn't do what? Doesn't have an element there of, showing off. It's branded. It's got the brand name. You understand? That's how we can put it in a modern context. So your BMWs, your Rolls Royces, your Porsches, mashallah, your Ferrari, if you're so brave. Whatever it is. But without that name, what does it mean? Even in clothing, I can give you the same piece of clothing with the same type of material, but if it doesn't have that brand name, people won't have the same value for it. It's got to have the name. Musawwama. And then, an'am. An'am are basically any type of animal that is herded or grazes. Like basically, it includes cows and sheep, and it could include camels, and for the Arabs. Now, you and I, city dwellers, I guess if you want to call us that, or whatever, suburbanites, whatever it is, right? We may not appreciate this because this isn't always considered wealth, but of course, in those times, and even today, having livestock is considered what? Wealth, right? If you have livestock, then you're wealthy. Well, health, that is of course crops, same thing. Agriculture. So if you have livestock, if you have crops, in essence, you're not going to starve. Correct? And also, you're going to make some money. If you have livestock, and it's not like farmers are poor, right? They're making a significant amount of, if they have a significant amount of livestock in agriculture, then of course they're making what? Profit, money. Okay? So then Allah says, that's fine and good. This is what you guys like. It's in you, it's part of you. You're going to find yourself naturally attracted to these things. However, ذَلِكَ مَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. But this is all, mata' are literally like temporary goods. Chattel is one way they call it, but temporary goods that you use for a particular period of time and then you throw out. So what is Allah saying about it? This is all the temporary goods of this world. Wallahu indahu husnul ma'ab. And with Allah is the most excellent of returns. Meaning something that you can go back to. A home, literally. Aba ya'ubu means to return. So the most excellent place to return, the most excellent abode or home that you can have is not this world. It's the one that's permanent. So what's the message? I'm sure you can figure it out. As much as these things are a part of you and endeared to you, right? As much as you like them, but it's all temporary. You're going to use it and leave it. And so where is your true home? Where will you truly get what you want and what you need? It is with Allah. In other words, in the akhirah. Everything's with Allah, even this world. Even all the gold and silver and sports cars and so forth and so on, and your spouses and your children, all of that's from Allah. But what he's saying is whatever I give to you in this world is only meant to be here for a particular point of time. And what I will give you when you leave this world is going to be much greater. So don't forget that point, even though it is natural. So that's the point I wanted to hone in on too, is the fact that when he says Zuyyina, it is indicated that this is something that we will inevitably find ourselves attracted to and, inclined towards these things. It's not something that you naturally will find yourself disinclined from. So nobody is born, in other words, saying, I don't like money. Okay? Nobody's born saying, I don't want to get married. I'm not interested in that. Nobody's born that way. Okay? Nobody's born saying, I don't really need a car. Who cares about that? Right? That's something.
Have you understood that this verse is mankind, or is it specific to man? Like man?
Oh, well, that's the English language. Nas doesn't imply any gender. So it's human beings. Humanity, we can even say. Obviously, especially nowadays, we're getting to the ultra politically correct and like genderless type of zone. So mankind is sexist.
So then the next verse is actually spouses, not women.
Well, no, he mentions an-nisa. It's a good point. Now, that's another issue. Why did he mention an-nisa and he didn't say the same thing for women, like husbands? Because men are a little bit more, how do I put it, aggressive when it comes to their desires for these things. Whereas women, they have the same desire, but they're not as, how do I put it again, aggressive. Like, it's I wouldn't say it's easier for them to live without a spouse, but they're not going to it's not going to affect them as much as a man who remains single for the rest of his life is, you can tell. There's a reason why the Romans used to keep their warriors from getting married. Because they knew if they never get married, they're going to kill a lot of people, right? They're going to be very, they're going to be in the battlefield in that mode. For a woman, it's difficult too. It's not that, but they're a little bit more graceful about holding their desires than men. Does that make sense? You can tell me as a woman, that's all nonsense, but they're a little bit more graceful at times and being patient than men are. Once a man is, at that point, then he's like the bull. That's the difference. The bull, once he's the bull, you don't want to get in his way. Right? If you get in his way while he's the bull, he's going to gorge you. Right?
Are there parts of the Quran that are addressed to men specifically? It's not always to everybody. Like this, and
this could be one of them, yeah. You could say that there are certain things that, there is a reason why that women are mentioned first, and that's because normally, like I said, even though it applies to women too, women obviously have desires as well. It's not like they don't have desires, but yeah, and they love money as well. But for men, they're more aggressive about the issue. You see what I'm saying? Normally, there's exceptions to the rules too. But we're talking about even, one can argue that, is there an exception to the rule for this ayah in terms of the desire for these things? And we could say yes. There's exceptions, meaning I just said that most people are born with these natural desires. We want this, we want that. Are there people that are different? Well, the Quran says that too. Yahya alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, they had no inclination. In fact, even the word is used in the Quran, husura. Husura means that he literally had no inclination towards women. Yahya. Meaning he had no inclination to any of these things. Women, children, homes, money, cars, none of that interested him. Even according to biblical tradition, he ate locusts and he lived in the jungle. He didn't have, same with Isa alayhi salam. He said he had no home, no property, no women, no children, right? He just had no connection with the dunya. So there's always exceptions to the rule. Right? It's not like you can't say that there's an exception. There is an exception, but this is talking about mankind or human beings in general, right? That most of us are like this. So if we want to kind of resist the temptation of the dunya, it takes effort. Whereas for Yahya alayhi salam, they said that it kind of some say that he didn't have, not that he didn't have shahwa, it's just that he had such control over it, it didn't bother him. right? He wasn't interested in it to that extent that, whereas for the rest of us, that's the whole point. Our shahwa are so ingrained in us that you're not going to wake up and just say, you know what, I'm going to be single for the rest of my life and get away with that easily. It's not going to happen. You're not going to get up in the morning and say, like, you know what, I don't care about money, and that's, and it's not going to one day, not to use a personal example, my father did that once, and I'll never forget. He was a hippie. Hippies rebel, right, against their parents' desires and wishes, and he went to college, actually Grove City, right here, or close. And then he was supposed to be a lawyer, right? That was his career, chosen career path of his parents, and he decided not to do that and play music for the rest of his life, the hippie things. And every once in a while, my father, and music is not an easy thing to make a living off of. You make a lot or you don't. And he's struggling, and when he was struggling, and I've heard him say it, like, I remember that, he said, I should have become a lawyer. Right? Like, why didn't I just do what my parents wanted me to do, and I wouldn't have these problems right now with money, right? So it comes out, right? As hard as you try to have a simple life and no money, it takes some effort for you to really, really appreciate it when the time comes and you're tested and say, yeah, okay, it's fine. I don't really need my money. You understand what I'm saying? So there's an effort behind most people in not having the dunya. Otherwise, there are some people, and those were exclusively that we know of that are mentioned in the Quran, Isa and Yahya, alayhi salatu wasalam, were the only people that were not inclined towards these things. Okay? They had no interest in those things, which is why Christianity, in their tradition, has monasticism and the like, because they're trying to follow that path. That's why they had these priests and monasticism and all of that, monks, because they believe that that's the path to spirituality. You have to renounce everything in the dunya, just like Isa alayhi salam did.
Doesn't work out too well.
No, it doesn't. Which is exactly what Allah says. وَمَا رَعُوهَا حَقَّ رِعَايَتِهَا. Like, they didn't really, from that to some of the problems that we see, which don't have to be mentioned, but we know about it. Even from that to like modern day Christianity and the what do they call it? The gospel of prosperity. Evangelical Christians, you know about that, right? No? Oh, wow. Yeah, these guys. By the way, they are the most adamant anti-Muslim Christian sect out there. All of them, most Christians, you will find that they're willing to talk and there's no problems, but they really don't like Muslims. They're ardent supporters of Israel. They give millions and millions of dollars every year to Israel because they believe that Isa alayhi salam won't come back until the Muslims are gotten rid of first. And then, then they have to convert all the Jews to Christianity too, which is interesting. But anyhow, they believe in the gospel of prosperity, which in essence is that the proof of God's love is the more money you have. They have mega churches. They literally spend, and their pastors, they're shameless. It's like, what is that guy, the famous 80s guy what was his name again? Was it? No.
Joel Osteen.
No, it was a big, I can't believe he was there.
Billy Graham? Yeah.
But he was one of them. And there was another one who was really popular because he got caught eventually, like doing
Swagger.
Jimmy Swagger, thank you. Millionaires. They make millions off of their churches. And openly, their churches even say, yeah, we want our pastor to... One pastor recently, I'm not even joking about it, he actually told his congregation, like, Imams, you should never complain about us. We're so happy with like nothing. And and these guys, he literally came up and told the congregation that God told me last night, I need my own private jet. And they did it. They gave him his own private jet. And if you ask him, we want our pastor. This is God's favor. God loves him and he's got a private jet. Ajib, that's the gospel of prosperity. Now again, like you said, they didn't live up too well to these standards, did they? From one extreme to the other. So from like absolute poverty all of a sudden to the gospel of prosperity, like let's just go all out. That's what happened. You can't. So alhamdulillah for Islam, which balances us. And obviously there are people in Islamic history that lived a life of austerity. And usually that happens as an example to other people. In other words, to kind of create a balance. So sometimes when the Muslims are very wealthy, there would be certain shuyukh and people that would deliberately live a little bit more simple life to kind of bring people back to a certain balance that, don't get so caught up. And sometimes other ulama too would deliberately have wealth. Like Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam Malik had like, I don't know, like they said like literally hundreds of shoes, pairs of shoes. You know, one for a different outfit or something like that, right? Why did they do that? Because at that time, again, wealth was prevalent and they didn't want anyone to look down on them. See? That if they didn't have this wealth, that they wouldn't really pay attention to them. This guy, right? So, anyway. So, inshallah, if we can, we may continue or just go on. Any questions, inshallah, about that particular ayah? No? MashaAllah. That's good, I guess. That's the gospel of prosperity. Pretty funny, huh? From the people that say that the one they say is God had no worldly possessions according to their tradition and all of it. So what does that say about Jesus? If you say that the proof of God's love is how much wealth you have, then he had nothing. What are you implying?